Evan Brooks stood in the rain outside the iron gates, staring at the mansion that looked like it had swallowed every driver before him. His phone buzzed, another overdue notice. Behind him, in their dim apartment, his 9-year-old daughter hadn't spoken in 3 months. The job posting had been clear: excellent pay, strict rules, absolute discretion. What it didn't mention was why no one in Mystic, Connecticut lasted more than 2 weeks working for Vivian Whitmore. Evan's finger hovered over the intercom button. He had $47 in his account and a child turning invisible from grief. He pressed it. The gate opened with a sound like a cage closing. He walked through anyway. Before we begin Evan's journey from desperate father to the man who would change everything, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's dive in. The mansion loomed against the October sky like something out of a Gothic novel, all sharp angles and dark stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Evan Brooks guided his 15-year-old Honda through the gates, windshield wipers beating against the downpour, and tried to ignore the knot tightening in his stomach. The circular driveway curved past manicured hedges and marble fountains that probably cost more than he'd earn in 5 years. He parked near the service entrance, killed the engine, and sat there gripping the steering wheel. "You can do this," he whispered to himself. "You have to do this." The interview had been brutal, not because of difficult questions, but because of who asked them. Vivian Whitmore had sat across from him in a study that could have housed his entire apartment, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, her gray eyes examining him like he was a balance sheet that didn't add up. She wore a black suit that probably cost what he used to make in a month, back when he had a real job, back when life made sense. "You understand the requirements, Mr. Brooks?" Her voice had been crisp, businesslike, completely devoid of warmth. "I need a driver available 6 days a week. Morning commute at 7 sharp, evening return by 6. Additional trips is required. Discretion is not optional, it's mandatory. I don't tolerate gossip, I don't tolerate tardiness, and I don't tolerate questions about my personal life." "I understand. Your resume shows a significant employment gap." She'd tapped one perfectly manicured nail against his paperwork. 2 years working as a mortgage analyst, then nothing for 18 months. Care to explain? Evan had forced himself to meet her eyes. "My wife died. Car accident. I took time off to care for my daughter." Something had flickered across Vivian's face, so quick he might have imagined it. "I see. And you're ready to return to work now?" "I'm ready to do whatever it takes to provide for my daughter." She'd studied him for another long moment, then slid a contract across the desk. "The pay is $60,000 annually, plus benefits. Hours are strict. Performance is monitored. Most people don't last." Evan had looked at the salary line and felt something crack open in his chest. Hope and desperation mixed together. 60,000. He could pay off the medical bills, keep the apartment, buy Lily new clothes instead of thrift store hand-me-downs. "I'll last," he'd said. Now, 3 days later, sitting in the rain outside this fortress of stone and silence, he wondered if he'd lied. The service entrance opened. A woman in her 60s emerged, holding an umbrella. She wore a simple gray dress and sensible shoes, her white hair caught in a neat bun. She gestured for Evan to follow. "Mr. Brooks, I'm Margaret Chen, the house manager. Come in out of this weather." Evan grabbed his jacket and followed her into a mudroom that was bigger than his living room. The floors were heated tile, the walls lined with custom cabinets. Everything gleamed. "Mrs. Whitmore is waiting in the garage," Margaret said, leading him through a hallway with crown molding and artwork that looked museum quality. "A few things you should know. She doesn't like small talk. She doesn't like excuses. She values punctuality above almost everything else. And she's been through 4 drivers in the past 6 months, so don't take it personally if she seems skeptical." "What happened to them?" Evan asked. Margaret's expression remained neutral. "Various reasons. One couldn't handle the hours. Another gossiped to the local paper about her schedule. 2 others just quit. Said the job wasn't what they expected." She paused at a door. "Between you and me, Mr. Brooks, Mrs. Whitmore isn't an easy person to work for, but she's fair and she pays extremely well. If you can handle the silence and the rules, you'll do fine." She opened the door to reveal a garage that looked like a luxury car dealership. A black Mercedes S-Class sat in the center bay, polished to mirror perfection. Beside it stood Vivian Whitmore, wearing charcoal slacks and a white blouse, checking something on her phone. "Mr. Brooks," she said without looking up. "You're 3 minutes early. Good. The vehicle is keyless. The fob is programmed to your thumbprint as of this morning. I have a meeting downtown at 8:30. We leave in 5 minutes." "Yes, ma'am." "I prefer silence during drives. No radio unless I request it. No questions about where we're going or why. Your job is to drive safely, efficiently, and discreetly. Understood?" "Understood." She finally looked at him, those gray eyes unreadable. The previous driver felt the need to offer commentary on traffic, weather, and local news. "I found it exhausting. I'm hiring you to drive, not entertain me. Are we clear?" "Completely clear." "Good." She moved toward the passenger side, then paused. "The back seat, Mr. Brooks. I'll sit in back." Evan slid into the driver's seat, and the car surrounded him with leather and technology. The dashboard glowed with more screens than his old office had computers. He adjusted the mirrors, tested the pedals, and tried to calm his racing heart. Vivian settled into the back seat with barely a sound. "The address is programmed into the navigation. Follow it exactly. I don't like shortcuts or creative routes." "Yes, ma'am." The drive into downtown Mystic took 23 minutes. Evan kept his eyes on the road, hyper-aware of every turn, every lane change, every decision. In the rearview mirror, he could see Vivian working on a tablet, her face illuminated by the screen's glow, her expression carved from ice. The silence was absolute, not uncomfortable exactly, but heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. Evan found himself cataloging details. The way she held her pen, the way she occasionally rubbed her temple as if fighting a headache, the way she never once looked out the window at the town passing by. He pulled up to a gleaming office building with Whitmore Development Group etched in chrome letters above the entrance. Before he could get out to open her door, Vivian was already emerging. "Return here at 11:45, she said. "Not 11:40? Not 11:50. 11:45 exactly." "I'll be here." She walked away without another word, her heels clicking against the pavement like a countdown. Evan sat in the parking garage for the next 3 hours, trying not to think about the bills piled on his kitchen table, or the way Lily had looked that morning, sitting at the breakfast table pushing cereal around her bowl, not eating, not speaking, not even crying anymore. Just empty. At 11:43, he pulled up to the building entrance. Vivian emerged at 11:45 exactly, slid into the back seat, and said, "Home." The return drive was just as silent. When they pulled into the mansion's garage, Vivian gathered her things and paused. "Tomorrow, 7 a.m. sharp. I have breakfast meetings Tuesdays and Thursdays at the Harbor Club. Familiarize yourself with the route tonight." "I will." She started to leave, then stopped. "Margaret mentioned you have a daughter." Evan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Yes, ma'am, she's 9. School-age children require consistent schedules. If my hours interfere with your parental responsibilities, address it now. I don't accept performance issues blamed on childcare conflicts." "My neighbor watches her before and after school. We're covered." Vivian nodded once. "Good. Consistency matters for children." She walked away, leaving Evan to wonder if there was something almost human buried under all that ice. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm as precise as Vivian's schedules. 7 a.m. pickups, downtown meetings, lunch appointments at restaurants where the cheapest entree cost more than Evan spent on groceries in a week, afternoon site visits to development projects, evening returns by 6 p.m. Vivian never deviated, never spoke unless giving directions, never acknowledged Evan beyond the professional minimum. But he started noticing things. The way she gripped her phone tighter when certain names appeared on the screen. The way she always sat in the same position in the back seat, right side against the window, like she was trying to put as much distance between herself and the rest of the world as possible. The way she rubbed that spot on her left ring finger where no ring sat, but where the skin was slightly lighter, like something had lived there once. At home, Lily drifted through their apartment like smoke. She went through the motions, school, homework, dinner, but she was disappearing. Evan could feel it. Every day, she faded a little more. "Baby, you want to help me make spaghetti tonight?" he'd ask, a small shake of her head. Want to watch a movie? That one you used to love with the singing princess? Another shake. Want to talk about... She'd already be walking away, back to her room, back to the silence that had swallowed her whole the day the police showed up to tell them Sarah wasn't coming home. Mrs. Rodriguez, their neighbor, caught Evan in the hallway one evening. She was 72, had lived in the building for 40 years, and treated Lily like a granddaughter. She's still not talking? Mrs. Rodriguez asked, her kind face creased with worry. No, the therapist says it's selective mutism, trauma response. Says she'll talk when she's ready, but... Evan ran his hand through his hair. It's been 4 months, Mrs. R. 4 months of silence. I don't know how to reach her. You're doing everything right, mijo. Job, therapy, patience. Sometimes healing takes time. What if time isn't enough? Mrs. Rodriguez squeezed his shoulder. Then you love her anyway. You keep showing up. That's all you can do. But Evan wanted to do more. He wanted to fix this, the way he used to fix things, with research, planning, action. Except grief didn't respond to spreadsheets. Trauma didn't care about his timeline. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks into the job. Evan arrived at 7 a.m. exactly to find Vivian already in the garage, pacing, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. I don't care about their concerns, Richard. We have permits, we have funding, and we have a timeline. If the neighborhood association has issues, they can file them properly through the channels. We're not stopping the Riverside project. She ended the call and slid into the car. Harbor Club, and drive faster than usual. I'm running behind. Evan navigated the morning traffic, pushing the Mercedes through gaps he'd normally avoid, trying to make up time without being reckless. They made it with 2 minutes to spare. That afternoon's schedule included a site visit to something called the Riverside Development Project. Evan followed the GPS to a neighborhood he recognized. Modest homes, well-maintained, the kind of place where families actually lived instead of just invested. Vivian met with her project manager, a nervous man named Tom, who kept dropping his clipboard. Evan stayed by the car, watching workers measure lots, stake boundaries, and discuss demolition schedules. Those houses are coming down? Evan asked Tom when Vivian stepped away to take another call. The whole block, Tom said. 18 properties. We're building a mixed-use complex, retail on the ground floor, luxury apartments above. Mrs. Whitmore's been planning it for 2 years. Evan looked at the houses. Kids' bikes and driveways, garden gnomes, window boxes with flowers. What about the people living there? Tom shrugged. They got buyout offers. Market rate plus 15%. Most already accepted and moved. Few holdouts, but legal's handling it. Handling it how? Standard stuff. Eviction proceedings if they don't accept the offers. Property gets condemned through the city process. It's all above board. Evan felt something cold settle in his stomach. He thought about his own apartment, his own landlord, his own precarious grip on stability, how easily it could all vanish. That evening, he asked Mrs. Rodriguez if she'd heard about the Riverside project. Her face darkened. I heard. My friend Rosa lives there. Lived there. They gave her 3 months to find a new place. 3 months! She's lived in that house for 35 years, raised her kids there. And now some developer wants to build expensive apartments nobody from the neighborhood can afford. The buyout was fair market value plus 15%, Evan said, hearing how hollow it sounded even as he said it. Fair? Mrs. Rodriguez's voice rose. You know what fair would be? Asking people what they need instead of telling them what they're getting. Rosa's buyout won't cover first and last month's rent anywhere decent in this city. She's probably going to have to move in with her daughter in Hartford, leave her whole life behind. But sure, it's fair, legal, above board. She shook her head. I thought you understood, Evan. Money doesn't make everything right. Evan went to bed that night thinking about houses being demolished, families being scattered, and the woman who paid his salary sitting in the back of that Mercedes making calls that destroyed people's lives with the same cool efficiency she used to order lunch. The next morning, Vivian noticed something was different. You're quiet today, she said as they drove toward another meeting. More than usual. Evan kept his eyes on the road. Just focused on driving, ma'am. You disapprove of the Riverside project. It wasn't a question. His hands tightened on the wheel. It's not my place to have opinions about your business. But you have them anyway. She was silent for a moment. You think I'm heartless, destroying a neighborhood for profit. I think you're doing what business people do, making money. That's not an answer to my question. Evan took a breath. You want honesty? Yes. I think displacing families who've lived somewhere for decades so you can build luxury apartments is heartless. But you're paying me to drive, not judge, so I'll drive. He expected anger, termination, maybe. Instead, Vivian was quiet for so long he thought she might have simply chosen not to respond at all. Then, my son would have agreed with you. Evan glanced in the rearview mirror. Vivian was staring out the window, her reflection showing an expression he'd never seen before, something raw and unguarded. You have a son? He asked carefully. Had, past tense. Her voice had gone flat. He died 6 years ago, car accident. 23 years old, full of idealism and opinions about how I ran my business. Thought I should build affordable housing instead of luxury developments. Thought I should care more about community impact than profit margins. She paused. He was right, but I was too stubborn to admit it while he was alive. Evan didn't know what to say. The silence stretched between them, but it felt different now. Less like a wall and more like shared territory neither of them knew how to navigate. I'm sorry for your loss, he finally said. Are you? Or are you thinking that karma caught up with me? I'm thinking loss is loss. It doesn't care about karma. It just takes what it wants and leaves you trying to figure out how to keep breathing. Vivian's eyes met his in the mirror. For the first time, he saw something besides ice there. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. Your wife, she said. The car accident. How long has it been? 16 months. 4 months since Lily stopped talking. Children process grief differently than adults. My son... She stopped, swallowed. It's difficult, watching them suffer and not being able to fix it. Yeah, Evan said softly. It really is. They didn't speak again for the rest of the drive, but something had shifted. Some invisible line had been crossed. That weekend, Evan took Lily to the art supply store. It had been one of Sarah's traditions, Saturday morning trips to let Lily pick out new colors, new brushes, new sketchbooks. She'd loved watercolors especially, spending hours painting flowers and landscapes and dreams in soft, blended hues. She hadn't touched a paintbrush since the funeral. Pick anything you want, Evan said, gesturing at the displays. Any colors that call to you. Lily stood there, small and silent, her eyes fixed on the floor. Baby, please, just one thing, one color. Nothing. Evan felt his chest tighten. He was losing her, every day, a little more, and he had no idea how to stop it. He bought a basic watercolor set anyway. 12 colors, brushes, paper, brought it home and set it up at the kitchen table. Lily looked at it like it might bite her. You don't have to paint, Evan said, but it's here if you want to, whenever you're ready. She walked away. The paint sat there untouched for 3 days. On Monday morning, Evan arrived at the mansion to find Margaret waiting by the garage door, her expression troubled. Is everything all right? He asked. Mrs. Whitmore needs you to pick something up before her morning meeting. She left a note with the address. Margaret handed him a piece of paper with an address in Old Mystic and a single word. Careful. The address led to a small antique shop tucked between a bakery and a bookstore. Inside it smelled like old wood and lavender. A woman behind the counter pointed him toward a package wrapped in brown paper. Mrs. Whitmore's order, the woman said. Tell her I found exactly what she wanted. Same year and everything. Evan carried the package carefully to the car. It wasn't heavy, but something about the way it was wrapped suggested fragility. When he arrived at the mansion, Vivian was waiting. She took the package without explanation and disappeared into the house. That afternoon's schedule was different. Instead of meetings, Vivian directed him to an address in a residential neighborhood. When they pulled up, Evan recognized the house, one of the holdouts from the Riverside project. An elderly woman was tending roses in the front garden. Vivian got out of the car. Wait here. Evan watched through the windshield as Vivian approached the woman, spoke briefly, then handed her the brown-wrapped package. The woman opened it, and even from the car, Evan could see her face crumble, not with sadness, but with something that looked like recognition. Relief. She pulled Vivian into a hug. Vivian stood stiff for a moment, then slowly, awkwardly hugged her back. When Vivian returned to the car, her eyes were red-rimmed. "What was that?" Evan asked before he could stop himself. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Her husband collected antique clocks. He died last year. She had to sell most of them when money got tight after the buyout didn't cover what she needed. That was his favorite, a mantel clock from 1952, the year they married. She looked out the window. "I tracked it down through 3 different estate sales." "Why?" "Because I'm demolishing her home. The least I can do is give her back one piece of what she's losing." Vivian's voice was barely above a whisper. "It doesn't fix anything, but it's something." Evan drove back to the mansion in silence, his entire understanding of Vivian Whitmore tilting sideways. That evening, he came home to find Lily sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the watercolor set. Not touching it, just looking. "Hey, baby," he said softly, setting down his keys. "Want company?" She didn't respond, but she didn't leave either. Evan sat down across from her, opened the paint set, dipped a brush in water, then in blue paint, made a simple stroke across the paper. "Your mom used to say painting was like breathing," he said. "You didn't think about it. You just let it happen." Lily's eyes followed the brush. Evan painted another stroke, green this time. She said colors had feelings. Blue was calm, red was brave, yellow was hope. His daughter's hand moved, just slightly, toward the brushes. "What color do you feel like today?" Evan asked. For a long moment, nothing. Then Lily's small hand picked up a brush, dipped it in gray paint, made a single stroke across the paper. It was the first voluntary action Evan had seen from her in months. "Gray's okay too," he said, his voice thick. "Sometimes we feel gray. That's honest." They sat there together, painting in silence, Evan with clumsy amateur strokes, Lily with the natural grace she'd inherited from Sarah. The paintings meant nothing. They were just color on paper. But Lily was holding a brush again, and that felt like everything. That night, after Lily went to bed, Evan stood in her doorway watching her sleep. She looked so small, so fragile, like something the wrong word could shatter. "I don't know if I'm doing this right," he whispered into the darkness. "I don't know if anything I'm doing is helping, but I'm trying, Lily. I'm trying so hard." He thought about Vivian tracking down that clock, about the way she'd stood there accepting that hug while looking like she might break from it, about the way loss had carved similar holes in both of them, and how they were both just trying to fill those holes with whatever they could find. The next morning, Evan arrived at the mansion to find Vivian already in the garage, but not alone. A man in an expensive suit was there, gesturing emphatically while Vivian listened with her arms crossed. "Community backlash is getting worse," the man was saying. "The city council is asking questions. Media is starting to pay attention. We need to move forward with the evictions or pull back on the timeline." "We're not pulling back," Vivian said coldly, "and we're not moving forward with evictions." "Then what exactly are we doing?" "Finding another way. Give me 2 weeks." The man threw up his hands. 2 weeks to do what? These holdouts aren't going to suddenly accept our offers because you ask nicely. Then maybe we make better offers. We're already 15% over market value. Then we go higher, or we adjust the project. I don't know yet, but I'm not forcing anyone out of their homes, not anymore. The man stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "Since when do you care about—" "2 weeks, Richard, that's final." He left, and Vivian stood there for a moment, her shoulders tight with tension. When she finally got in the car, she looked exhausted. "Morning meeting is canceled," she said. "Take me to Riverside instead." They drove in silence. When they arrived, Vivian got out and walked through the neighborhood alone, stopping at houses, knocking on doors, having conversations Evan couldn't hear. She was out there for 2 hours. When she finally returned to the car, she looked defeated. "They don't trust me," she said, more to herself than to Evan. "They think this is a tactic, another negotiation strategy." "Can you blame them?" Evan asked carefully. "No," But I don't know how to convince them I'm serious. Maybe you can't. Maybe you just have to show them. Vivian met his eyes in the mirror. How? I don't know, but I know that tracking down that clock for Mrs. Martinez meant something. Not because it fixed the problem, but because it proved you saw her, saw what mattered to her. Maybe that's where you start, seeing people instead of obstacles. Vivian was quiet for a long time. Then, your daughter, the painting, is she doing better? The question caught Evan off guard. She picked up a brush for the first time in months yesterday. Just gray paint, nothing else. But it's something. Gray's a start, Vivian said softly. Sometimes that's all we get. Small starts, tiny moments. We have to learn to call that enough. They drove back to the mansion, and for the first time since Evan started this job, the silence felt less like distance and more like understanding. That understanding became the foundation for something neither of them expected. A fragile alliance built on shared grief and the desperate hope that broken things could somehow be repaired. Over the next week, Vivian's schedule shifted in ways that surprised everyone. Instead of the usual circuit of board meetings and investment lunches, she spent hours in the Riverside neighborhood, sitting in living rooms that smelled like coffee and old memories, listening to stories she'd never bothered to hear before. Evan drove her from house to house, watching through the windshield as this woman who'd built an empire on ruthless efficiency learned to simply sit still and pay attention. Mrs. Chen has arthritis, Vivian said one afternoon, sliding into the back seat after a 2-hour visit. She can't manage stairs anymore. The buyout offer doesn't account for the fact that ground floor apartments in this city cost 30% more than upper units. She'll have to move 2 towns over, away from her doctor, her church, her daughter. Evan pulled into traffic. Did you tell her you'd adjust the offer? I told her I'd think about it, which she interpreted as another negotiation tactic. Vivian's frustration bled through her usually controlled voice. They've all been burned by developers before, promises that never materialized. Community benefits that somehow never benefited the community. I don't know how to convince them this is different. Maybe because you don't know if it is different yet, Evan said carefully. Maybe you're still figuring out what you're willing to sacrifice to make it different. Vivian was quiet for several blocks. The project is budgeted at $42 million. Profit margin is projected at 18%. If I increase buyouts to actually cover relocation costs, if I add accessibility requirements, if I build in affordable units, the numbers stop working. My board will revolt. Investors will pull out. Richard's already threatening to quit. So you're saying it's impossible. I'm saying it's expensive. There's a difference. Evan thought about his own apartment, the constant calculations he ran in his head, groceries versus therapy copays, keeping the heat on versus buying Lily new shoes. Everything was a trade-off. Every choice meant something else got sacrificed. My neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, he said, she told me something once. Said her mother used to say, lo barato sale caro. Cheap comes out expensive. Maybe the real cost of that profit margin is higher than the spreadsheet shows. Philosophy from the driver's seat, Vivian said, but there was no edge to it. Your neighbor sounds wise. She is. She's also facing eviction because her building got sold to developers. Rent's going up 40% in 3 months. She's lived there 40 years, but the numbers don't care about that. Vivian's reflection in the mirror went very still. The Grandview Apartments on Seaside? Yeah, you know it? I know the developer who bought it. We worked together on a project in Hartford. She pulled out her phone, typed something, then stared at the screen. He's using the same playbook. Minimal improvements, maximum rent increases, force out long-term tenants to attract higher-income renters. It's effective, and legal, and completely destructive. Can you do anything about it? I can make a phone call. Whether it changes anything is another question. She looked up. Your neighbor, she has a lease? Month to month. Most of the building is. Of course she is. Vivian made a note. Give me her full name and unit number. I'll see what I can do. No promises. Evan felt something shift in his chest, surprise mixed with cautious hope. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, but if I'm going to start caring about community impact, I should probably start with the communities connected to people who work for me. Consider it enlightened self-interest. That evening, Evan came home to find Lily at the kitchen table with the watercolors again. This time she'd moved beyond gray. A pale blue wash covered part of the paper, and she was carefully adding darker blue strokes on top. "That's beautiful, baby," Evan said, setting down his keys. "What are you painting?" She didn't answer, but she didn't stop painting either. Progress came in these tiny increments, a color added, a brush held, a moment of focus that suggested she was still in there somewhere, still capable of creating instead of just surviving. Mrs. Rodriguez knocked on the door an hour later, her face flushed with confusion and something that might have been hope. "Evan, the strangest thing just happened. The new building owner called me directly, said he's revising the lease terms, capping the rent increase at 8%. Said it was part of a new community stability initiative." She shook her head. "I don't understand. Yesterday they were talking eviction. Today they're offering me a new 5-year lease with rent control provisions." Evan thought about Vivian making calls from the back seat, her voice crisp and businesslike as she dismantled someone's predatory playbook. Maybe they had a change of heart. "Buildings don't have hearts, mijo. They have balance sheets." Mrs. Rodriguez studied him. "This had something to do with your new boss, didn't it? I might have mentioned your situation. She might have made a phone call. Vivian Whitmore made a phone call. For me, a woman she's never met." Mrs. Rodriguez sat down heavily. "The same Vivian Whitmore who's tearing down the Riverside neighborhood?" "The same one who's trying to figure out how not to tear it down," Evan said. "I think. People like that don't change, Evan. They just get better at looking like they care." "Maybe. Or maybe grief changes people in ways they don't expect." He thought about Vivian's face when she mentioned her son, the rawness that had broken through all that careful control. "I'm not saying she's suddenly become a saint, but I think she's trying to be less of whatever she was before." Mrs. Rodriguez squeezed his hand. "Just be careful. Rich people's guilt doesn't usually last long enough to matter." But over the following days, Vivian's commitment seemed to deepen rather than fade. She canceled a major investor meeting to spend an afternoon with the Riverside families, spreading architectural plans across someone's dining room table and asking what they actually needed. "The retail space on the ground floor," she said, pointing to the renderings. "What if instead of national chains, we prioritize local businesses? Gave current neighborhood residents first option on commercial leases at below-market rates?" "We can't afford below-market rent," said Mr. Patterson, a retired teacher who'd lived in Riverside for 30 years. "We're not business owners. We're just trying to stay in our homes." "What if the homes stayed too?" Vivian spread out a new set of plans. "What if we reduced the footprint, kept half the existing houses, renovated them to modern standards, and built the new complex on the empty lots and the properties already sold? Yes, it reduces units. Yes, it cuts profit. But it preserves the neighborhood character and keeps families in place." The room went silent. People exchanged glances, trying to determine if this was real or just another tactic. "Why would you do that, Ick?" asked Mrs. Martinez, the woman with the antique clock. "You already bought most of the properties. You have permits. You could bulldoze everything and we couldn't stop you." Vivian looked at the plans, then at the faces around the table, weathered, skeptical, tired of being disappointed by people who promised change and delivered displacement. "Because my son would have hated what I was about to do," she said quietly. "And because I'm tired of building things that destroy more than they create. And because—" She stopped, swallowed. "Because I want to look at myself in the mirror and see someone he might have been proud of. That matters more than the profit margin." Mr. Patterson leaned forward. "You're serious. You're actually serious about this." "I'm serious about trying. I can't promise it'll work. The numbers might not support it. My board might fire me. But I'm going to try." She met his eyes. "I need you to try too. Work with me. Tell me what you need. Help me figure out how to make this something that serves you instead of displacing you." An older man in the back spoke up. "You're asking us to trust you, after you spent 2 years planning to tear down our homes. I'm asking you to give me a chance to do better. That's all. A chance." The meeting lasted 4 hours. By the end, there was no consensus, but there was something that hadn't existed before. Possibility. The faint, fragile hope that maybe this could end differently than every other development story they'd lived through. Driving back to the mansion, Vivian looked exhausted in a way Evan had never seen. Not the crisp fatigue of a long business day, but the deep weariness of someone who just exposed parts of themselves they usually kept locked away. "Thank you," she said suddenly, "for the comment about seeing people instead of obstacles. I've been thinking about it all week." "I didn't say anything revolutionary." "No, but sometimes the obvious things are the hardest to see when you're used to looking at spreadsheets instead of faces." She was quiet for a moment. "My son used to accuse me of being blind to anything that couldn't be monetized. Said I'd forgotten what it felt like to be human. I told him he was naive, that business required pragmatism, not sentiment. What would you tell him now?" "That he was right, and that I'm sorry I didn't listen sooner." Her voice cracked slightly. "But he's not here to hear it, so instead I'm trying to do what he would have wanted. Better late than never, I suppose." Evan thought about Sarah, about all the conversations he wished he could have, all the apologies and promises and confessions that would never be heard. "I think the people we lose would rather see us grow than watch us stay frozen in regret." "Is that what you tell yourself? About your wife?" "It's what I'm trying to believe. Some days it works better than others." They pulled into the mansion's driveway just as the sun was setting, painting the Gothic stone in shades of amber and rose. For the first time since Evan started working there, the building looked less like a fortress and more like just a very large, very lonely house. "How's your daughter doing?" Vivian asked as Evan put the car in park. "With the painting?" "She's using more colors now, still not talking, but she's painting almost every day. Her therapist says it's good, that she's processing through art instead of words." "My son used to paint. Terrible at it, but he loved it anyway. Landscapes mostly. Mountains and forests and places that look nothing like Connecticut." Vivian's expression softened into something almost like a smile. "I have about 50 of them stored in the attic. Couldn't bring myself to get rid of them after he died. Couldn't bring myself to look at them either. Maybe someday you will." "Maybe." She gathered her things. "Same schedule tomorrow, 7 a.m. But the next morning's schedule was interrupted by an emergency board meeting. Richard and 3 other executives were waiting in Vivian's office when Evan dropped her off, their faces set in identical expressions of corporate concern. Evan waited in the car, but the garage door was open and voices carried. "Completely unrealistic timeline," Richard was saying. "You're talking about redesigning the entire project, renegotiating with contractors, and somehow maintaining profitability while cutting units and adding affordable housing requirements. The math doesn't work, Vivian." "Then we make it work." "How? By taking a loss? Our investors didn't fund this project out of charity. They expect returns." "They'll get returns, just not the returns they expected." "You can't unilaterally change the scope of a $42 million project because you suddenly developed a conscience," Richard's voice rose. "You built this company on tough decisions and smart business. Don't throw that away for some misguided guilt trip." "Guilt trip?" Vivian's voice went cold. "You think this is about guilt?" "I think this is about your son, and I think you're letting grief cloud your judgment." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. "Get out," Vivian said quietly. "Vivian, get out of my office. You're fired. Pack your things and leave." "Oh, you can't fire me over this. The board answers to me. I'm the majority shareholder. I built this company from nothing, and I'll run it however I see fit. Now get out before I have security remove you." Evan heard footsteps, a door slamming, then silence. He got out of the car and found Vivian standing in the middle of the garage, her hands shaking. "Are you all right?" he asked. "No?" She looked at him, and for the first time he saw tears in those ice-gray eyes. "I just fired my COO. My board is going to revolt. I'm about to tank a major project and possibly the entire company, and I have no idea if any of this is going to work or if I'm just destroying everything I built for nothing. It's not for nothing if you're trying to do the right thing." "The right thing?" She laughed, but it sounded broken. "I've spent 30 years not caring about the right thing, just the profitable thing, the efficient thing. And now I'm supposed to believe that suddenly prioritizing people over profit is going to work out? That caring actually matters?" Evan stepped closer. "My wife used to say that caring is the only thing that matters. That everything else, success, money, achievement, It's all just noise if you're not connected to something real, something human. Your wife sounds like she was a better person than I am. She was. But she also believed people could change, could choose to be better. He met Vivian's eyes. You made that choice. You're doing the work. That counts. Vivian wiped at her eyes angrily, like tears were a weakness she couldn't afford. I don't know how to do this. How to run a business with actual ethics. How to make the numbers work when caring makes everything more expensive. Maybe you don't have to figure it out alone. Maybe you ask for help. From who? From the people you're trying to help. From architects who specialize in sustainable development. From community organizers who know what neighborhoods actually need. Evan shrugged. You spent 30 years building your way. Maybe it's time to try building with people instead of for them. Vivian was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll need a new COO. Someone who actually believes in this. Any suggestions? I'm a driver, not a headhunter. You're also the only person who's been honest with me in months. So I'm asking, if you were rebuilding a company's leadership, what would you look for? Evan thought about it. Someone who sees people before they see profit. Someone who asks questions instead of giving orders. Someone willing to fail at doing the right thing instead of succeeding at doing the wrong thing. That's not exactly a common resume qualification. No, but maybe that's the problem with most resumes. That afternoon, instead of meetings, Vivian asked Evan to drive her to the community center in Riverside. She'd arranged to meet with local organizers, urban planning experts, and representatives from affordable housing nonprofits. I need help, she told them, standing in front of a conference room full of skeptical faces. I need to figure out how to develop this neighborhood in a way that actually serves the people who live here. Not in theory, not in some glossy brochure about community benefits. Actually serves you. And I don't know how to do that because I've never tried before. So I'm asking, teach me, tell me what you need, help me figure out how to make this work. A young woman with a social work degree and a neighborhood organizing background raised her hand. Why should we believe this isn't just optics? That you won't take our ideas and then water them down until they're meaningless? Because I'm giving you veto power, Vivian said. I'm creating a community advisory board with actual authority to reject plans that don't meet your standards. Yes, I own the land. Yes, I'm funding the project. But you get final say on whether it moves forward. If I can't design something you approve, it doesn't get built. The room erupted in whispers. That's unprecedented, someone said. Developers don't give communities veto power. Most developers don't blow up their own projects because their dead son would have hated them, Vivian replied. I'm not most developers. Not anymore. The meeting lasted 5 hours. By the end, a framework was emerging, something that looked less like traditional development and more like collaborative neighborhood evolution. Smaller footprint, mixed-income housing, commercial space for local businesses, green space, community gardens, design that complemented existing architecture instead of demolishing it. The profit margin was tiny, the timeline was extended, the risk was enormous, and Vivian approved it all. Driving home that night, Evan watched her in the rearview mirror. She looked lighter somehow, despite the massive gambles she'd just taken. You realize you might lose everything, he said. I've already lost everything that actually mattered, Vivian replied. My son, my humanity for a while. At this point, money seems like a small price to pay to get part of myself back. You think he'd be proud? Your son? She smiled, and it was real. I think he'd say, about damn time, Mom, and then he'd roll up his sleeves and help figure out the details. He was good at that, seeing the big picture while staying focused on the practical steps. Sounds like someone else I know. Are you comparing me to my idealistic, paint-loving son who drove me crazy with his impractical ethics? I'm saying maybe he was more practical than you gave him credit for. Maybe caring about people and building sustainable communities isn't naive. It's just harder, requires more creativity, more effort, more willingness to fail. Vivian looked out the window at Mystic passing by. The houses with lights and windows, the restaurants with families inside, the ordinary miracle of people living their lives in spaces they could afford, in communities they belonged to. I want to meet her, she said suddenly. Your daughter, Lily. Evan's hands tightened on the wheel. Why? Because I've been thinking about what you said, about her painting in gray, about how small progress counts. I have something I'd like to show her, if you're comfortable with that. Show her what? My son's paintings. They're terrible, but they're full of color, full of hope. Maybe seeing them would help. Maybe it wouldn't, but I'd like to try. Evan thought about Lily, still so fragile, still so silent, about the risk of letting someone new into their careful, protected space, about the fact that Vivian Whitmore was offering something precious, a piece of her grief to help heal theirs. Saturday afternoon, he said. Come to our apartment, 2:00, and bring the paintings. Vivian nodded, and something passed between them in that moment, an understanding deeper than words, a recognition that grief had made them both braver and more vulnerable than they'd ever imagined possible. Saturday came with gray skies that threatened rain. Evan spent the morning cleaning the apartment, rearranging furniture, trying to make their small space look less shabby, less like evidence of how far they'd fallen. Then he stopped, realizing Vivian had spent hours sitting in riverside living rooms just as modest as this one, listening to stories without judgment. She arrived exactly at 2, wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual corporate armor. She carried a large portfolio case. This is a nice neighborhood, she said, looking around the hallway with its scuffed walls and flickering fluorescent lights. Good bones. Needs investment, but good bones. Mrs. Rodriguez poked her head out of her apartment. Evan, you didn't tell me you were having company. She stopped, recognizing Vivian. Oh. Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Vivian Whitmore. Vivian, this is my neighbor I told you about. Mrs. Rodriguez looked between them, clearly trying to reconcile the woman who'd saved her apartment with the woman she'd called heartless. Thank you, she said finally, for whatever you did about the lease. My grandson called it a miracle. I don't believe in miracles, but I believe in people who choose to help when they don't have to. It wasn't a miracle, Vivian said. It was a phone call and a threat to pull my business from a mutual investment fund. Practical leverage, not divine intervention. Same result, though. I suppose it is. Inside the apartment, Lily sat at the kitchen table with her paints. She looked up when they entered, her dark eyes wary. Lily, this is Miss Vivian, Evan said gently. She works with me. She brought something to show you. Vivian knelt down to Lily's eye level, careful not to crowd her. Your dad told me you like to paint. I brought some paintings my son made. He wasn't very good at it, but he loved trying. Would you like to see them? Lily didn't respond, but she didn't look away either. Vivian opened the portfolio case and carefully removed a canvas. It showed mountains rendered in bold, clumsy strokes, purple peaks against an orange sky, proportions all wrong, technique amateur, but bursting with life and color. This was his first attempt at landscape painting, Vivian said. He was 16. His art teacher told him to stick to photography. He painted 15 more landscapes that year just to prove he could. She laid out another painting, a forest in impossible shades of green and gold. Then another, a lake reflecting a sunset that looked like fire. Each one was technically flawed but emotionally honest, proof that someone had looked at the world and tried to capture its beauty, even without the skill to do it perfectly. Lily moved closer, her small hand reaching out to touch the textured paint. He told me once that painting wasn't about making things look real, Vivian said softly. It was about making things look true, the way they felt instead of the way they were. She paused. I didn't understand what he meant then, but looking at your painting there, the blue and gray, I think I'm starting to. Lily's fingers traced the brushstrokes on the mountain painting. Then she went to her own watercolor, picked up her brush, and added a stroke of purple to her blue-gray composition. Evan felt his throat tighten. Purple. A new color. A brighter choice. Vivian saw it too. That's beautiful, she said. The purple makes the gray look intentional, like storm clouds before sunset. Lily added more purple, then a touch of orange. The painting was still mostly gray and blue, but now there were hints of color emerging, like hope creeping into sadness. They sat there for an hour, Vivian and Lily painting side by side while Evan made coffee and tried not to cry. Vivian had brought supplies, a small canvas, acrylic paints, brushes. She attempted to copy one of her son's landscapes, producing something even worse than the original. "I'm terrible at this," she said, showing Lily the muddy result of mixing too many colors. Lily almost smiled. Almost. It was the closest thing to joy Evan had seen on his daughter's face in months. When Vivian finally left, she paused at the door. "Thank you for letting me visit. It helped more than you know." "Helped you?" "Seeing someone else learn to find color again. Reminds me it's possible." She looked at the portfolio case. "Keep the paintings, all of them. I think they belong with someone who might actually appreciate them the way Caleb hoped they'd be appreciated." "We can't." "You can. Please. They've been in my attic for 6 years. Let them live in a place where someone looks at them and sees hope instead of loss." After she left, Lily carried the mountain painting to her room and hung it on the wall where she could see it from her bed. That night, she painted for 2 hours straight, adding layers of color to her composition until it looked like what Vivian had described. Storm clouds breaking to reveal sunset. Evan stood in the doorway watching, remembering what Sarah used to say about art being a language when words failed. Maybe Lily couldn't tell him how she felt yet, but she was starting to show him. And that felt like the beginning of something. The beginning Evan had witnessed in Lily's painting became something more over the next 2 weeks. Not a sudden transformation, but a gradual thawing, like ice giving way to spring. She still didn't speak, but she painted every day, and the colors grew brighter with each attempt. Orange appeared, then yellow, then a red so vivid it looked like her brush was on fire. At work, Vivian's transformation was proving equally gradual and far more complicated. The board meeting she'd been dreading finally happened on a Tuesday morning, and Evan drove her there in silence so thick he could barely breathe through it. "Whatever happens," Vivian said as they pulled up to the office building, "I want you to know this job is secure. If they vote me out, if the company implodes, you'll get 6 months severance and a reference that'll open doors anywhere you want to go." "You think they're going to fire you?" "I think I just redesigned a flagship project to cut profits by 60% and gave veto power to a community board. So yes, termination is a distinct possibility." She straightened her jacket. "But I'd rather be fired for doing the right thing than keep my position by doing the wrong thing. Some prices are too high, even for security." She walked into that building like someone heading to their execution, shoulders back, head high, refusing to show fear even though Evan could see it in the tension of her jaw. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Evan sat in the parking garage trying to work on a crossword puzzle and failing to focus on anything except the clock. At 11:30, his phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. "Still employed. Barely. Come to the main entrance." He found her standing on the sidewalk, looking exhausted and relieved and slightly shell-shocked. "They didn't fire you," he said. "They tried. 3 board members called for a vote of no confidence. But I still own 51% of shares, which means I can't be removed unless I voluntarily step down." She leaned against the car. "They're furious. 2 threatened to resign, but the other 4 are willing to see where this goes. Mostly because they're terrified of the PR nightmare if they fire me right after I announce a community-centered development initiative." "So you won." "I survived. That's not the same as winning." She got in the car. "Take me to Riverside. I need to tell them the project's moving forward before I lose my nerve." The community meeting that afternoon was cautious but hopeful. Vivian presented the revised plans, explained the compromises, acknowledged the risks. The advisory board asked hard questions, and she answered honestly instead of hiding behind corporate spin. "This is going to take longer than originally planned," she said, "probably 18 months instead of 12, and there will be problems we haven't anticipated. But I'm committing to full transparency. Monthly community updates. Open books on the budget. If something goes wrong, you'll know about it immediately." Mr. Patterson stood up. "And if the numbers don't work? If the profit margin gets too thin and your investors pull out? Then I fund it myself. I have personal assets. I'll use them if needed." Vivian's voice was steady. "This project is happening. The only question is whether it happens the right way or not at all." Mrs. Martinez raised her hand. "Why? Why are you doing this? Really?" Vivian looked at the faces around the room, people who'd been hurt by developers like her, people who had every reason not to trust her, people brave enough to hope anyway. "Because my son died believing I cared more about buildings than people. And he was right. I did. Her voice cracked slightly. I can't change that. Can't take back the years I wasted being someone he couldn't respect. But I can try to become someone he might have been proud of. That's why. It's selfish, really. I'm trying to live with myself. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Mrs. Martinez nodded. Selfish or not, if it helps my neighbors keep their homes, I'll take it. We approve the plans. Let's build something that doesn't destroy what already exists. The advisory board voted unanimously to move forward. After the meeting, people lingered to shake Vivian's hand, to thank her, to offer suggestions for the community garden space. Evan watched her navigate these interactions with awkward grace, clearly unused to gratitude but trying to receive it with dignity. On the drive back, she was uncharacteristically quiet. You did good today, Evan said. I committed to funding a project that might bankrupt me. I'm not sure that qualifies as good. You gave people hope. You chose them over profit. That's good in any language. Vivian looked out the window. Hope is expensive. I'm realizing that more every day. It costs more than buildings, more than profit margins. It costs certainty, control, the comfortable distance that comes from not caring too much. Is it worth it? She thought about that for a long time. Ask me again when we're not bankrupt. But despite the financial risks, something was changing in Vivian that had nothing to do with money. She started arriving at the office earlier, staying later, throwing herself into the Riverside project with an intensity that surprised everyone. She hired an architect who specialized in community-responsive design, brought in engineers who understood sustainable development, consulted with social workers who could identify what families actually needed versus what developers assumed they needed. Margaret mentioned it one morning while Evan waited in the garage. I've worked for Mrs. Whitmore for 12 years. I've never seen her like this. She actually smiled at a contractor yesterday. Smiled. I nearly dropped the coffee I was carrying. Change is weird for everyone, Evan said. It's more than weird. It's unsettling. She's always been brilliant, always been driven, but there was this coldness to everything she did, like she was building monuments instead of places people would actually live. Now she's obsessing over playground equipment and whether the community center has enough accessible parking. Margaret shook her head. Whatever you said to her, it worked. I didn't say anything special, just treated her like a person instead of a boss. That might be the most special thing anyone's done for her in years. At home, Lily's progress continued in small, precious increments. She started responding to questions with nods or head shakes, not words, but acknowledgement. She began eating more, sleeping better, spending less time staring into space and more time creating. Her therapist, Dr. Monroe, called it significant progress. She's rebuilding her sense of safety. Art is giving her a language when verbal language feels too risky. Let her lead. Don't push for words, just celebrate the communication she's capable of giving. One evening, Lily brought Evan a painting, a house with yellow windows, a garden full of flowers, and two figures standing in the doorway, one tall, one small. Is this us? He asked gently. You and me? She nodded. It's beautiful, baby. We look happy. She looked up at him with those serious dark eyes, then pointed to a blank spot on the canvas and made a questioning gesture. You want to add something else? Another nod. She picked up her brush, mixed colors carefully, and added a third figure to the painting, smaller, lighter, made of pale colors and soft edges. A ghost. A memory. A mother who would always be part of them, even though she was gone. Evan's vision blurred. Yeah, she's still part of our family. Always will be. Lily set down her brush and leaned against him. Not a hug exactly, but contact. Connection. The first time she'd initiated physical affection since Sarah's death. He wrapped his arms around her and let himself cry, and she let him, and somehow that felt like healing too. The next morning, Vivian noticed something different when Evan arrived at work. You look lighter, she observed as they drove toward a construction site meeting. Something good happen? Lily painted us as a family last night, added her mom to the picture. It's the first time she's acknowledged Sarah's death in any direct way. That must have been difficult and beautiful. Yeah, both at once. He navigated through morning traffic. Dr. Monroe says she's making real progress. Says the selective mutism is starting to lift. Doesn't know when she'll talk again, but thinks it's coming. Children are remarkably resilient. They just need space to heal and people who love them enough to wait. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Caleb didn't talk for 3 months after his father left. Just stopped. The therapist said it was his way of controlling something when everything else felt chaotic. I was working 80-hour weeks building the company, and I just let the nanny handle it. Told myself he'd be fine, that kids bounce back. Did he? Bounce back? Eventually. But he shouldn't have had to bounce back alone. I should have been there, should have put down the spreadsheets and just sat with him. She looked out the window. I'm trying not to make the same mistakes with this project, with these families, trying to actually be present instead of just efficient. They arrived at the Riverside construction site where crews were beginning demolition on the properties already sold and starting renovation on the houses that would be preserved. Vivian spent 3 hours walking the site, talking to workers, examining plans, making sure every detail aligned with the community board's requirements. A young woman approached carrying a clipboard and wearing a hard hat. Itar Mamskam. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Sarah Chen, the new project manager. I wanted to introduce myself and go over the timeline revisions. Vivian shook her hand. You're Margaret's daughter. She mentioned you were coming on board. Yes, ma'am. I just finished my master's in sustainable urban development. When Mom told me about this project, about what you're trying to do, I had to be part of it. Sarah's enthusiasm was infectious. I've never seen a developer voluntarily reduce their footprint and increase community engagement. This could be a model for responsible development nationwide. Or it could be an expensive disaster that bankrupts the company, Vivian said dryly. Let's not start writing case studies until we actually succeed. Fair enough. But I believe in what we're doing here. So does my team. We're going to make this work. Watching them review plans together, Evan saw something shift in Vivian's expression. Pride, maybe, or hope. The realization that other people believed in her vision enough to stake their careers on it. On the drive back, Vivian was energized in a way he'd never seen. She reminds me of Caleb, that idealism combined with actual practical skills. He would have loved this project, would have been right there in the dirt, measuring lots and arguing about window placement. You talk about him more now, Evan observed. Used to be you could barely mention his name. Grief is strange. For years, talking about him felt like ripping open a wound that wouldn't heal. Now it feels like keeping him alive. Like if I share his ideas, his values, his ridiculous optimism, then he's still influencing the world even though he's gone. She paused. Does it work that way with your wife? Does talking about her help? Sometimes. Other times it makes the loss feel fresh again. But Lily needs to hear stories about Sarah. Needs to know her mom was real, not just a photograph. Evan thought about the family portrait Lily had painted. I'm learning to hold both things at once, the grief and the gratitude, the missing and the remembering. That's harder than it sounds. Everything about this is harder than it sounds. They drove in comfortable silence for a while, and Evan realized how much had changed since that first day when silence felt like a wall between them. Now it felt like understanding, two people who'd been broken by loss learning to build something new from the pieces. That weekend, Vivian invited Evan and Lily to the mansion. Not for work, but for what she called a proper painting session. She'd cleared out a sunroom on the second floor, filled it with easels and canvases and enough art supplies to stock a small store. I haven't been in this room since Caleb died, she said, showing them around. It was his studio. I locked it up after the funeral and tried to pretend it didn't exist. But that's not honoring his memory. That's just hiding from it. Lily moved through the space slowly, touching brushes, examining paint tubes, running her fingers over unfinished canvases that still held traces of Caleb's work. He was working on this one when he died, Vivian said, pointing to a large canvas showing a city skyline with gardens growing on every rooftop. Urban agriculture. He was obsessed with the idea of green spaces in unexpected places. Kept saying cities didn't have to choose between development and nature. They could have both if designers were brave enough to try. Lily picked up a brush and looked at Vivian questioningly. Would you like to finish it? Vivian asked. Add your own touch to his vision? Lily nodded solemnly, like she understood the weight of what she was being offered. They spent the afternoon painting together, Vivian attempting another of Caleb's landscapes, Evan creating something abstract that was more therapy than art. and Lily carefully adding flowers to the rooftop gardens in Caleb's unfinished piece. She chose bright colors, hopeful colors, painting blooms that seemed to grow toward the sky. "That's perfect," Vivian said softly, watching Lily work. He would have loved those flowers, would have said they make the whole painting make sense. Mrs. Rodriguez stopped by with homemade empanadas around lunchtime, having been invited by Vivian earlier in the week. She took one look at the art studio and laughed. "This is not what I expected when you invited me to the famous Whitmore mansion. I was picturing formal dining rooms and uncomfortable chairs, not paint-splattered paradise." "Life is full of surprises," Vivian said, accepting the empanadas gratefully. "Thank you for bringing these. And for coming. I'm trying to practice something Evan taught me, building community instead of just building buildings." "You're doing good, Mija. I hear what you're doing in Riverside. The whole neighborhood is talking about it. People are calling it a miracle." "It's not a miracle. It's just late-blooming decency." "Same thing, different words." Mrs. Rodriguez watched Lily paint. "And this little one. Look at her creating beauty. That's healing right there." They ate lunch together in that sunny room surrounded by art, and it felt like family. Not the family any of them were born into, but the family they were choosing to build from shared grief and unexpected grace. Later, as Evan and Lily prepared to leave, Vivian walked them to the door. "Thank you for coming, for sharing her with me." She looked at Lily. "You're welcome here any time. The studio is yours whenever you want it." Lily surprised everyone by stepping forward and hugging Vivian's legs, a quick, fierce embrace before she pulled back and returned to Evan's side. Vivian's eyes went bright with tears. "Thank you, sweet girl. That means more than you know." On the drive home, Evan glanced at Lily in the rearview mirror. She was looking out the window, and there was something different in her expression. Not quite a smile, but not the blank emptiness that had lived there for months. Something lighter, something that looked almost like peace. That night she painted until bedtime, and for the first time since Sarah's death, Evan heard her humming while she worked. No words yet, but sound, voluntary sound, music born from something other than pain. He called Dr. Monroe the next morning to report the progress. "That's excellent," the therapist said. "Humming, physical affection, artistic expression, these are all signs that she's reconnecting with the world. Don't push for speech, but continue celebrating every form of communication she offers. She's finding her way back." "How long until she talks again?" "There's no timeline for trauma recovery. Could be weeks, could be months. But she's moving in the right direction. Trust the process." Evan tried to trust it, tried to be patient. But every day of silence felt like a countdown to something, either healing or permanent loss, and he didn't know which. At work, the Riverside project consumed Vivian's attention completely. She was on site more than she was in the office, getting dirt on her expensive shoes and learning the names of every worker, every neighbor, every person affected by what she was building. "You're going to burn out," Margaret warned one morning. "You're working 16-hour days, skipping meals, running yourself into the ground." "I'm making up for lost time," Vivian replied. "I spent 30 years building things wrong. I need to prove I can do it right." You can't prove anything if you collapse from exhaustion." But Vivian kept pushing, kept driving herself towards some undefined goal that Evan suspected had less to do with the project and more to do with redemption. She was trying to earn forgiveness from a son who couldn't give it, trying to become worthy of respect from someone who'd never see what she'd become. The breaking point came 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon that started normally and ended in disaster. Evan picked Vivian up for an afternoon meeting with the Community Advisory Board. She looked tired, her usual precise appearance slightly rumpled, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept well in days. "You all right?" he asked. "Fine, just need coffee." They were halfway to Riverside when Vivian's phone rang. She answered, listened for a moment, then went very still. "When did this happen?" Her voice was tight. "How many units? I see." "No, don't issue a statement yet. I need to assess the damage first." She ended the call and closed her eyes. "We need to go to the Grandview Apartments. Now." "Mrs. Rodriguez's building. What happened?" "Fire. Started in a third-floor unit about an hour ago. No casualties, but significant damage to the upper floors. The developer is trying to use it as justification for immediate demolition." Evan's stomach dropped. Mrs. Rodriguez, call her. Make sure she's safe. His hands shook as he dialed. Mrs. Rodriguez answered on the third ring, her voice shaky but alive. Evan, thank heavens, I'm all right. I wasn't home when it started, but the building... Her voice broke. They're saying it's too damaged to repair. They're going to tear it down, and everyone has 30 days to find new housing. We're on our way. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Just wait for us. They arrived to find fire trucks still on scene, residents gathered on the sidewalk with whatever belongings they'd managed to grab, and the developer's representative already circulating with buyout paperwork. Vivian walked straight to the fire chief. What's the actual damage assessment? Top 2 floors are heavily damaged. Smoke and water damage throughout. But the structure is sound. With proper remediation and renovation, it's salvageable. Then why is the developer pushing immediate demolition? The fire chief's expression hardened. You'd have to ask him. But between you and me, this is the second suspicious fire in a building he's bought this year. Both times, fire started right before he was planning to file for demo permits anyway. Vivian's face went cold with fury. She turned to the developer's representative, a smug man in an expensive suit who clearly thought he'd won. Stop distributing that paperwork immediately, she said. Ms. Whitmore, with all respect, this isn't your property. No, but I know the investor group funding your projects. I know your timeline. And I know arson when I see it. She pulled out her phone. I'm calling the state fire marshal and requesting a full investigation. If this was deliberately set to expedite demolition, you're looking at criminal charges. The man's smugness evaporated. You can't prove... I don't need to prove anything. The fire marshal will. In the meantime, these residents deserve actual support, not predatory buyout offers designed to take advantage of their trauma. She turned to the gathered crowd. Anyone who needs temporary housing while this is investigated, I'll cover it. Hotels, short-term rentals, whatever you need. Keep your receipts. You'll be reimbursed. Mrs. Rodriguez stepped forward. Why would you do this? We're not your responsibility. Because Evan works for me, which makes you part of my extended community. And because I'm tired of developers treating people like obstacles instead of human beings. Vivian's voice carried across the crowd. You're not being displaced, not on my watch. We're going to investigate this fire properly, and if this building can be saved, we're going to save it. The developer's representative tried to argue, but Vivian cut him off with a look that could freeze water. My lawyers will be in touch. Until the investigation concludes, this property is in legal limbo. Touch one brick, and I'll have you tied up in court for years. She spent the next 4 hours coordinating emergency housing, calling in favors, arranging for salvage teams to help residents recover belongings from undamaged units. Evan watched her move through the crowd, offering practical help instead of empty sympathy, and he understood something fundamental about why she'd been so successful in business. When she committed to something, she became an unstoppable force. By evening, every displaced resident had temporary housing arranged. Mrs. Rodriguez hugged Vivian so hard she nearly knocked her over. You saved us, she said, crying. You saved my home. I haven't saved anything yet, Vivian replied, but I'm going to try. On the drive back to the mansion, Vivian sat in silence, staring at nothing. That was incredible, Evan said. What you did back there. That was me realizing I've been complicit in this system for 30 years. How many fires have I ignored? How many suspicious coincidences have I chosen not to investigate because it would slow down projects or complicate partnerships? She pressed her hands against her eyes. I'm not a hero, Evan. I'm just someone finally developing a conscience about the damage I've caused. You're someone choosing to do better. That counts. Does it? Or am I just easing my guilt while the real problems continue? You literally stopped a building from being demolished and gave 20 families a chance to keep their homes. If that doesn't count, I don't know what does. Vivian looked at him in the rearview mirror. Your neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, she said I saved her. But you're the one who told me about her situation. You're the one who made me see beyond the profit margins to the actual people being affected. So really, you saved her. I just made the phone calls. We both did it. That's how this works. Nobody saves anyone alone. When they pulled up to the mansion, Vivian didn't immediately get out. Lily's painting, she said. the one where she added her mother. Can I see it? I'd like to understand what that kind of courage looks like. It's at home, but I can bring it next time. No, I mean, could I come with you now? See her? See the painting in the place where it was created? She looked almost vulnerable. I know it's your private space. I'm not trying to intrude, but I need to see something real tonight, something honest. All day I've been fighting fires, literal and metaphorical, and I need to remember why I'm doing this. Evan thought about his small apartment with its secondhand furniture and peeling paint, about how different it was from this Gothic mansion. Then he thought about what Vivian had said earlier, about building community instead of walls. Come on, he said. Lily will probably be painting anyway. She can show you herself. They drove through the evening streets in Evan's old Honda, Vivian looking strangely at ease in the passenger seat of a car held together by hope and routine maintenance. When they pulled into the apartment complex parking lot, she stared up at the building. 4 stories of weathered brick, window air conditioning units jutting out at odd angles, a broken security light flickering over the entrance. This is home, Evan said, suddenly self-conscious. It's not much, but the rent's affordable and the neighborhood's safe. It looks like a place where people actually live, Vivian said. Not just invest or profit from. There's a difference. Inside, Lily was exactly where Evan expected. At the kitchen table, surrounded by paints and brushes, working on a new piece. She looked up when they entered, and her eyes widened slightly at seeing Vivian in their space. Miss Vivian wanted to see your painting, Evan explained gently. The one with our family. Is that okay? Lily studied Vivian for a long moment, then nodded and pointed toward the refrigerator where the painting was held up by magnets shaped like letters of the alphabet. Vivian approached it slowly, reverently, like she was entering sacred ground. The painting showed the house with yellow windows, the garden full of impossible flowers, and the 3 figures, Evan and Lily, solid and bright. Sarah rendered in pale watercolors and soft edges, present but translucent, there but not there. Oh, Vivian breathed. Oh, this is extraordinary. She stood there for a full minute just looking, and Evan saw tears tracking down her face. You painted her the way memory feels, Vivian said to Lily. Not gone, but different. Still part of everything, even though she's not solid anymore. That's... Her voice broke. That's the most honest thing I've ever seen. Lily climbed down from her chair and went to stand beside Vivian, looking up at her own work as if trying to see what this woman saw in it. I have pictures of Caleb all over the mansion, Vivian said softly. Photographs in frames, formal and frozen. But they don't capture this. This understanding that the people we lose stay with us in ways that aren't about physical presence. They become part of how we see the world. She looked down at Lily. You understand that. You're 9 years old and you understand something I've been running from for 6 years. Lily reached out and took Vivian's hand, a small gesture that hit Evan like a truck. His daughter, who'd withdrawn from touch, from connection, from the world, was offering comfort to a woman who needed it. Vivian knelt down, still holding Lily's hand. Thank you for showing me this, for being brave enough to put your grief into art instead of just hiding from it like I did. Lily pointed to the painting Vivian had attempted at the mansion, the terrible copy of Caleb's landscape that currently sat abandoned in the studio. You want me to finish it? Vivian asked. Lily nodded emphatically. I'm not good at painting. You saw how badly I did. Lily picked up a brush and held it out to Vivian, insistent. She's telling you it doesn't matter if you're good, Evan translated. Just that you try. That you keep creating even when it's hard. Vivian took the brush with shaking hands. Okay, I'll try. I promise I'll try. They sat at the kitchen table together, Vivian and Lily painting side by side while Evan made dinner, spaghetti with jarred sauce, garlic bread from the grocery store bakery, salad from a bag. Nothing fancy, but honest, real. Mrs. Rodriguez knocked on the door around 7, carrying a container of flan. I heard you had company, and I thought... She stopped, seeing Vivian at the table with paint on her hands. Well, this is unexpected. Join us, Vivian said. Please, I'm told your flan is legendary. They ate dinner around that small table, 5 people who shouldn't have fit but somehow did. Mrs. Rodriguez told stories about the building, about neighbors who'd lived there for decades, about the community that existed in these modest walls. Vivian listened with the same intense focus she usually reserved for business meetings, asking questions, remembering names, treating these stories like they mattered. The developer who owns Grandview now, Mrs. Rodriguez said, he bought 3 other buildings in the neighborhood, raised rents on all of them, forced out families who'd been there for generations. The fire today, that's just his latest tactic. The fire marshal's investigating, Vivian said, and I meant what I said about covering housing costs. You need a safe place to live while this gets sorted out. Why are you doing this, really? Mrs. Rodriguez leaned forward. You don't know us. We're not your friends? Not your family? We're just people you heard about through Evan. Vivian was quiet for a moment, considering. Because I spent 30 years being the person who didn't ask why, who just executed business plans without thinking about whose lives I was disrupting. And my son died knowing I was that person, knowing I valued profit over people, efficiency over empathy. She looked around the table. I can't change what I was, but I can choose what I become. And I choose this, caring about what happens to people even when it's inconvenient or expensive or doesn't benefit me directly. That's going to cost you, Mrs. Rodriguez said. People who care pay higher prices. I'm learning that. My board thinks I've lost my mind. My investors are threatening to pull funding. My former COO is probably starting a betting pool on how soon the company collapses. Vivian smiled slightly. But I sleep better now than I have in 6 years. Turns out a clear conscience is worth more than a healthy profit margin. After dinner, Lily showed Vivian all her recent paintings, the progression from gray to color, from empty space to full compositions, from silence to visual song. Vivian examined each one carefully, offering genuine appreciation instead of empty praise. You have real talent, she told Lily. Not just technical skill, but emotional honesty. That's rarer and more valuable. She paused. Would you like to display some of these at the community center we're building in Riverside? We're going to have a gallery space for local artists. Your work would be perfect. Lily's eyes went wide. She looked at Evan questioningly. If you want to, he said. It's your choice. She nodded enthusiastically, then ran to her room and came back with 3 paintings, the family portrait, a sunset in impossible oranges and purples, and a new piece showing a garden with flowers growing through cracks in concrete. These are perfect, Vivian said. They tell a story, loss and growth and beauty finding a way even in broken places. She looked at the garden painting more closely. Is this what you're building in Riverside? The community garden? It could be, Vivian said thoughtfully. If the community wants it. We have space allocated for green areas, but the specific design is still being developed. Would you like to be part of that process? Help design a garden that looks like your painting? Lily's whole face lit up, the first real smile Evan had seen since Sarah died. She nodded so hard her hair bounced. Then it settled. I'll have the landscape architect contact Evan and we'll set up a meeting. You can show them your vision. Vivian stood to leave. Thank you for welcoming me into your home, for sharing your art and your stories. This meant more than I can express. At the door, she turned back to Lily. Keep painting. Keep being brave enough to put your feelings into color. The world needs more of that honesty. After Vivian left, Lily grabbed her sketchbook and started drawing garden designs with furious concentration. Evan watched her work, marveling at how this job he'd taken out of desperation had become something else entirely, not just employment, but connection, not just survival, but healing. He called Dr. Monroe the next morning to report the development. She's engaging with long-term planning, the therapist said. That's significant. It means she's starting to see a future worth participating in. The selective mutism often lifts when children feel safe enough to rejoin the world. She's getting there. How will I know when she's ready to talk? You won't. She will. And when she does, just listen. Don't make a big deal of it. Just accept her words the way you've been accepting her art. As communication, as connection, as enough. The next few weeks became a blur of activity. The fire marshal's investigation confirmed arson at the Grandview Apartments. A former maintenance worker with ties to the developer had been paid to start the fire. Criminal charges were filed. The developer's company was shut down pending investigation, and the building's sale was voided. Vivian bought the property herself. Not for development, not for profit, but for renovation and preservation. I'm converting it into a housing cooperative, she announced at a community meeting. Residents will collectively own the building. No landlord to raise rents or force people out, just community members making decisions together about their own homes. The plan was ambitious and complicated and probably financially insane, but watching Mrs. Rodriguez cry with relief made every complication worthwhile. At the same time, the Riverside project was progressing. The preserved houses were being renovated with careful attention to maintaining their character while updating systems and accessibility. The new construction was designed to complement rather than dominate the existing architecture, and the community center was taking shape, a building that would house meeting spaces, a commercial kitchen, a small medical clinic, and yes, an art gallery. Lily attended the planning meetings, sketchpad in hand, working with the landscape architect to design gardens that matched her paintings. She still didn't speak, but she communicated through drawings, through nods and head shakes, through the fierce determination in her eyes when she thought something should be done differently. Your daughter is a natural designer, the architect told Evan. She understands how people use space, how color affects mood, how gardens can create community. She's going to create something special. At work, Vivian was running on fumes and determination. The board meeting where they'd review second quarter numbers was approaching, and everyone knew it would be brutal. The Riverside project was over budget and behind schedule. The Grandview purchase had been an unplanned expense. The company's profit margins were the lowest they'd been in 15 years. They're going to crucify you, Margaret warned. The numbers look terrible on paper. Then I'll explain why the numbers don't tell the whole story, Vivian said. Why keeping families in their homes and building sustainable communities matters more than quarterly profits. They're not going to care about families. They care about returns on investment. Then maybe they need different priorities. The morning of the board meeting, Evan drove Vivian downtown in silence. She looked exhausted, her suit perfectly pressed, but her face showing every one of her 53 years. Whatever happens today, she said, I want you to know I don't regret any of it. Not the Riverside redesign, not the Grandview purchase, not any decision I've made in the past 3 months. For the first time in 6 years, I'm proud of the work I'm doing. That's worth more than keeping my position. You're not going to lose your position. You don't know that. I know you own 51% of the company. I know you've built something valuable, even if the current numbers don't reflect it. And I know that sometimes doing the right thing costs everything, but that doesn't make it the wrong choice. Vivian smiled slightly. When did my driver become my therapist? Around the time my boss became my friend. The meeting lasted 6 hours. Evan waited in the parking garage doing crossword puzzles and trying not to imagine worst-case scenarios. At 4:30, Vivian emerged looking shell-shocked. So? Evan asked as she got in the car. They voted to give me 1 year, 12 months to prove the new approach can work. If profits don't improve by next year's third quarter, they'll force a restructuring that removes me from day-to-day operations. She leaned her head back against the seat. 1 year to save the company, while simultaneously proving that ethical development can be profitable. No pressure. You can do it. You have more faith in me than I have in myself. Good thing one of us does. They drove back toward the mansion, but halfway there, Vivian asked him to detour to Riverside. She wanted to see the progress, to remind herself why she was fighting this battle. The construction site had transformed over the past month. The preserved houses gleamed with fresh paint and new windows. The framework for the new building was taking shape. 4 stories of mixed-use space designed to feel like it belonged in the neighborhood rather than dominated it. And in the center of it all, the community garden was being installed, following Lily's designs almost exactly. Vivian walked through it slowly, touching newly planted trees, examining the raised beds where vegetables would grow, running her fingers over the mosaic-tiled benches that local artists had created. It's beautiful, she said. It's actually going to work. You sound surprised. I am. I spent so long building things that looked good on paper and felt soulless in reality. This is different. This feels alive already, and it's not even finished. They stood there as the sun set over Riverside, watching workers pack up for the day, seeing lights come on in the preserved houses where families were already living. witnessing something new being born from the ruins of what might have been another displaced community. My son would have loved this, Vivian said quietly. Would have stood right here and told me I was finally getting it right. I think he'd be proud. I hope so. I'm trying to build the kind of legacy he could respect instead of the one I spent 30 years creating. Impressive, but hollow. On the drive back, Vivian's phone rang. She listened, her expression shifting from neutral to shocked to something that might have been joy. That was the New York Times, she said after hanging up. They want to do a feature story on the Riverside Project, on ethical development and community-centered design. It's going to be in their Sunday real estate section. That's amazing. It's terrifying. National attention means national scrutiny. If this fails, it fails spectacularly and publicly. But she was smiling despite the fear. But if it works, if we actually pull this off, maybe it changes the conversation. Maybe other developers see there's a different way. No pressure, Evan said, echoing her earlier words. She laughed and it sounded genuine. At least we're going down swinging. That evening, Evan came home to find Lily painting with unusual intensity, her face set in concentration. She'd been working on the same canvas for days, a large piece showing the Riverside Community Garden in full bloom, with people of all ages working the plots, children playing, families gathering. That's going to be beautiful when it's done, he said. She looked up at him and something in her expression shifted. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. Her lips formed words, but no sound came out, and frustration flashed across her face. It's okay, Evan said gently. You don't have to force it. I understand what you're painting. But Lily shook her head stubbornly. She wanted to say something, needed to say something, and the words were right there, but trapped behind months of silence and grief and fear. Evan knelt beside her. Baby, there's no rush. Whenever you're ready, I'll be here to listen. But you don't have to be ready today. She took a shaky breath and tears started falling. Not the silent tears she'd shed so many times before, but crying that came with sound. Small hiccuping sobs that broke Evan's heart and filled it simultaneously because at least she was feeling something strong enough to express. He held her while she cried, and when she finally pulled back, she pointed at the painting with one hand and at her chest with the other. You want to be part of making the real garden? He asked. Want to help plant it? She nodded, then pointed at him, at herself, at the painting again. She was trying so hard to communicate something bigger than just gardens. You want us to be part of building something beautiful together? Another nod, more emphatic. We are, baby. We already are. This painting, this garden, this whole new life we're figuring out, we're building it together, you and me, and it's going to be beautiful even if it's different from what we had before. She hugged him tight, and Evan felt something shift, not healing exactly, but movement toward it. Progress measured in tears and painted gardens, and the fierce determination of a 9-year-old who refused to stay silent forever. The next morning, Vivian had an unusual request when Evan arrived at work. I need to make a site visit to the company's other developments, the ones I approved before my conscience kicked in. I need to see what kind of damage I've done over the years. They spent 3 days driving to projects across Connecticut and Massachusetts. Luxury apartment complexes that had displaced working-class neighborhoods, commercial developments that had destroyed small business districts, renovation projects that had priced longtime residents out of their own communities. At each site, Vivian asked questions, talked to former residents who'd been forced to move, documented the human cost of efficiency and profit margins. She took notes in a leather journal, her handwriting getting messier as the weight of what she'd done accumulated. I knew this was happening, she said on the third day, standing outside a development in Hartford where a thriving immigrant community had been scattered to make room for high-end retail. I knew, and I didn't care because it was legal and profitable and my board approved it. I told myself that's just how business works. You can't change the past, Evan said. No, but I can stop pretending it doesn't matter, and I can do better going forward. She looked at the gleaming storefronts that had replaced family-owned businesses. I'm setting up a fund for communities displaced by my developments. Reparations, essentially. It won't fix what I broke, but it's something. The board will never approve that. I'm not asking them to. I'm using personal money, my choice, my responsibility, my attempt at making amends. That evening, Vivian asked to stop by Evan's apartment again. She'd been working on Caleb's painting, the terrible landscape she'd promised Lily she'd finish, and wanted to show her the progress. Lily examined it critically when Vivian spread it out on the kitchen table. The mountains were still clumsy and the proportions still wrong, but there was something in it now that hadn't been there before. Earnestness, maybe, or hope. The willingness to try even knowing the result wouldn't be technically perfect. Lily picked up a brush and added touches to the painting, small corrections in perspective, a few highlights that made the landscape pop. Not taking over, just collaborating, making it better while keeping Vivian's original vision intact. "Thank you," Vivian said. "It's perfect now." "Well, perfect for what it is. An honest attempt by someone who's still learning." Lily smiled and nodded, then did something extraordinary. She took Vivian's hand and led her to the refrigerator, to the family portrait with Sarah rendered in translucent watercolors. She pointed at Sarah, then at Vivian, then at herself. The message was clear. You understand this kind of loss. You're part of this family of people who know what it means to lose someone and keep going anyway. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, I understand, and I'm honored that you'd include me." That night, after Vivian left, Lily painted a new version of the family portrait. This time there were more figures. Evan and Lily still solid and bright, Sarah still translucent and present, but now there were others too. Mrs. Rodriguez bringing food, Vivian with paint on her hands, Dr. Monroe with her kind smile. A whole community of people who'd become family through shared struggle and unexpected grace. Evan hung it on the refrigerator next to the original, marveling at how his daughter was documenting their healing through art, showing him what she couldn't yet say, that family wasn't just blood, wasn't just the people you were born to. It was also the people you chose, the people who chose you back, the community you built from broken pieces. The next week brought the New York Times reporter to Riverside. She spent 2 days interviewing residents, photographing the construction, talking to Vivian about the philosophy behind the project. "Why are you doing this?" the reporter asked during their final interview. "Most developers in your position would take the profit and run. What made you choose differently?" Vivian thought about it carefully. "I lost my son 6 years ago, and I realized after he died that he'd been right about almost everything, about how I was building my business, about how development should serve communities rather than displace them, about how profit without purpose is just greed with better PR." She paused. "I can't bring him back. Can't undo the years I wasted being someone he couldn't respect. But I can try to become the person he believed I could be. That's worth more than any profit margin." The article ran 3 weeks later with the headline, "When Developers Choose Community Over Profit, One Woman's Journey from Corporate Titan to Neighborhood Builder." It was fair but honest, acknowledging both Vivian's past failures and her current efforts at redemption. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Other developers called asking about the model. Nonprofits reached out wanting to collaborate. Investors, different investors, ones who valued impact over pure profit, expressed interest in funding similar projects. But the most important response came from the Riverside community themselves. They threw a celebration at the half-finished community center, inviting everyone who'd been part of the project's transformation. Lily's paintings were displayed on the walls, her garden designs, her family portraits, her documentation of what it looked like when broken things started growing back together. People stood in front of them, reading her visual language, understanding her story, even though she'd never spoken a word about it. Evan stood with Vivian and Mrs. Rodriguez, watching Lily show other children the garden plans, communicating through gestures and drawings with perfect clarity. "She's going to talk soon," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "I can feel it. She's just waiting for the right moment." "I hope you're right," Evan said. "I'm always right about children. Comes with being a grandmother 6 times over." Mrs. Rodriguez squeezed his arm. "You did good, mijo. Both of you. Took a terrible situation and built something beautiful from it." Vivian raised her glass of sparkling cider. "To building beautiful things from terrible situations. May we all be brave enough to try." They clinked glasses, and in that moment, surrounded by a community that shouldn't have existed but did, Evan felt something he hadn't felt since Sarah died. Hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope of early grief, but solid hope, grounded hope. The kind of hope built on evidence rather than wishes, on progress rather than promises. The kind of hope worth believing in. The hope Evan felt that evening proved justified in ways he couldn't have predicted. 3 days after the celebration, he arrived at work to find Vivian already in the garage, but she wasn't alone. A group of people in business attire stood with her, examining architectural plans spread across the hood of the Mercedes. "Evan, perfect timing," Vivian said. "These are representatives from the Sustainable Development Coalition. They want to use the Riverside model for projects in 5 other cities." A woman in a sharp blazer extended her hand. "Mr. Brooks, your employer has created something remarkable here. We'd like to help her scale it nationally." "Scale it how?" Evan asked. "Consulting, primarily. We have developers across the country who want to transition to community-centered models but don't know where to start. Mrs. Whitmore has agreed to serve as an advisor, helping them redesign projects to prioritize residents over profit margins." Vivian looked energized in a way Evan had never seen. It's a chance to influence the industry from the inside. To show that ethical development isn't just possible, it's replicable. The pay is minimal compared to my usual consulting rates, but the impact could be enormous. What about the board? The 1-year deadline? That's the interesting part. The Times article generated enough positive attention that investors are actually seeing the value in what we're doing. 2 new impact investment firms have expressed interest in buying out some of our traditional investors. It might actually work. She paused. It won't be easy, and we're not safe yet, but we have a fighting chance. Over the next month, Vivian split her time between Riverside and consultation calls with developers in Chicago, Portland, Atlanta, Denver. Each conversation followed a similar pattern: skepticism giving way to curiosity, resistance melting into willingness to try something different. "They all say the same thing," Vivian told Evan during one of their drives. "They know the current model is broken. They see communities being destroyed, families being displaced, neighborhoods losing their character, but they don't know how to change course without losing everything. So they just keep doing what they've always done." "Sounds familiar?" Evan said. "Yes. Well, I had the advantage of grief forcing me to reevaluate everything. They need a different catalyst." She looked out the window at Mystic passing by. "That's what the consulting work is, really, being the catalyst for other people's transformations." At home, Lily's transformation was accelerating. She'd started responding to questions with written notes when gestures weren't enough. Her therapist called it a positive sign. Finding new ways to communicate meant she was preparing to find her voice again. The garden installation at Riverside began in early November, and Lily was there every weekend, helping plant perennials and bulbs that would bloom in spring. She worked alongside Mrs. Rodriguez and other community members, communicating through smiles and shared labor, building something beautiful one plant at a time. "Look at her," Mrs. Rodriguez said, watching Lily carefully position marigolds along a border. "That's a child who's finding her way back to the world." "I just wish she'd talk," Evan admitted. "I know I'm supposed to be patient, but every day of silence feels like another day lost." "Mijo, silence isn't always loss. Sometimes it's gathering, like soil preparing for seeds." Mrs. Rodriguez squeezed his shoulder. "She'll speak when the words are ready. Trust her." The community center's grand opening was scheduled for the week before Thanksgiving. Final construction was racing to meet the deadline, workers putting in overtime to finish the gallery space where Lily's paintings would be displayed. Vivian was there almost constantly, checking every detail, making sure the building lived up to the community's vision rather than some corporate idea of what they should want. "The accessible entrance needs to be the main entrance," she insisted to the architect. "Not a side door, not an afterthought. The main entrance. If we're building for everyone, we need to design for everyone from the start." "That'll cost more," the contractor warned. "Then it costs more. Make it happen." The night before the opening, Evan found Vivian sitting alone in the gallery space, surrounded by Lily's paintings hanging on pristine white walls. She looked small in that big empty room, vulnerable in a way her boardroom persona never allowed. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Tomorrow we're officially opening a project that could either revolutionize community development or bankrupt my company. The entire neighborhood will be here. The press will be here. If this fails, it won't fail." Look around you. Evan gestured at the space. This is already success. A building designed with the community instead of for them. A gallery showing a 9-year-old's paintings because they're beautiful and true, not because her parents could afford to buy wall space. A garden planted by the people who'll harvest it. That's not failure, Vivian. That's exactly what you set out to build. She stood and walked over to Lily's family portrait, the one showing Sarah as translucent watercolor, present but not solid. Your daughter is wiser than most adults I know. She understands that loss doesn't erase love, that the people we've lost stay with us in how we see the world, how we create, how we choose to keep living. She learned that from watching you, Evan said. Watching you transform grief into purpose. Watching you choose to build something meaningful from the wreckage of what you lost. I learned it from watching both of you. Vivian touched the painting gently. This, choosing to paint her mother instead of pretending the loss didn't happen, this is the bravest thing I've ever seen. It gave me permission to stop running from Caleb's memory, to let him be part of what I'm building instead of a wound I'm hiding. The morning of the grand opening dawned clear and cold, the kind of November day that feels like possibility. Evan dressed Lily in her favorite purple sweater, the color she'd first added to her paintings, the color of hope creeping into sadness. She'd been painting since dawn, working on one final piece she refused to let him see. When they arrived at the community center, the parking lot was already full. People from Riverside, from neighboring communities, from the press, from other cities studying what Vivian had built. The building gleamed in the morning light, its design somehow both modern and timeless, standing with the neighborhood instead of dominating it. Inside, the space was transformed. The gallery walls displayed Lily's paintings alongside work from other local artists. The community kitchen smelled like fresh bread and coffee. The meeting rooms were set up for presentations and workshops. And through the back windows, the garden spread out in all its late autumn beauty, ready for spring planting. Vivian stood at a podium in the main hall, facing a crowd of several hundred people. She looked nervous, Evan realized. Actually nervous. The woman who commanded boardrooms with ice-cold confidence was shaking slightly as she prepared to speak. "Thank you all for coming," she began. 6 months ago, this project looked very different. I was planning to demolish an entire neighborhood to build luxury apartments that would have displaced every person who'd made this community home. It was legal, it was profitable, and it was wrong. She paused, letting that sink in. My son Caleb died 6 years ago. He was 23, idealistic, and absolutely convinced I was building my business on the backs of vulnerable people. I told him he was naive. That business required pragmatism, not sentiment, that caring about every individual life affected by development would make it impossible to build anything. Vivian's voice strengthened. He was right. I was wrong, and it took losing him and then meeting some extraordinary people to understand that. She looked at Evan and Lily in the front row. This building exists because a single father working as my driver had the courage to tell me that tracking down an antique clock for a displaced resident mattered, because his 9-year-old daughter taught me through her paintings that broken things can be made beautiful again if we're brave enough to acknowledge the breaks instead of hiding them. Because a neighborhood full of people who had every reason to distrust me chose to give me a chance anyway. The crowd was silent, listening. This isn't just a community center. It's proof that development doesn't have to destroy communities, that profit and purpose aren't mutually exclusive, that the most valuable thing we can build isn't the tallest building or the highest return on investment. It's trust, connection, spaces where people actually want to live their lives. Vivian smiled slightly. My son would have loved this building, would have stood right here and told me it was about time I got it right. So this is for him. For everyone who believed we could do better, and for every community that deserves better than being treated as an obstacle to overcome. The applause started slowly, then built into something powerful. People stood, and Evan saw tears on faces throughout the crowd. This was more than a building opening. This was witnessing transformation of a person, a project, a possibility. After the ceremony, Lily tugged on Evan's hand and led him to the gallery. She stopped in front of a new painting he'd never seen before, the one she'd been working on that morning. It showed the community center surrounded by the garden in full bloom, with people of all ages moving through the space. But in the center, Rendered in that same translucent watercolor technique she'd used for Sarah were two figures, a young man with a paintbrush and an older woman with architect's plans. Caleb and Vivian, together in the building they'd never built together in life, united finally in purpose and vision. Vivian appeared beside them, saw the painting, and made a sound between a laugh and a sob. "Oh," she whispered. "Oh, Lily, this is—" She couldn't finish, just stood there crying while Lily watched with serious, understanding eyes. Mrs. Rodriguez joined them, looking at the painting over Vivian's shoulder. "That child has a gift, not just for art, but for seeing what matters." "She does," Evan agreed, pulling Lily close. "She really does." The celebration continued through the afternoon. Tours of the facility, presentations about sustainable development, workshops on community organizing. But the real magic happened in smaller moments. Neighbors meeting in the community kitchen, kids running through the garden, people discovering the library corner and the children's play space, and the quiet room designed for meditation or prayer or just sitting with your thoughts. Late in the afternoon, Evan found Vivian in the gallery again, this time surrounded by a group of developers from other cities, all asking questions about how to replicate this model. "The key is listening," she was saying, "not pretending to listen while you wait to tell them what you've already decided. Actually listening and being willing to change your entire plan based on what you hear. It's uncomfortable. It's expensive. It takes longer. But it produces something worth having instead of just something profitable." One of the developers, a younger man from Seattle, shook his head. "My investors would never accept that timeline or those margins." "Then find different investors," Vivian said simply. "There are impact investment firms now specifically looking to fund ethical development. The money exists. You just have to be willing to sacrifice pure profit for actual purpose." Easy for you to say. You're already established. "I'm also risking everything I've built over 30 years. My board gave me 1 year to prove this works financially, or I lose operational control of my company. So no, it's not easy for me either. But it's worth it. Because at the end of my life, I want to be remembered for what I built that mattered, not just what I built that made money." The man looked thoughtful. "Can I get your contact information? I'd like to discuss this further." Vivian handed him a business card, and Evan realized she'd come prepared with a whole stack of them. She was actively recruiting other developers to this approach, building a movement rather than just a single project. As evening approached and the crowd thinned, the core group gathered in the garden. Evan, Lily, Vivian, Mrs. Rodriguez, Margaret, Sarah Chen, the project manager, and several Riverside residents who'd been part of the advisory board. "We should make a toast," Mr. Patterson said, raising a cup of cider, "to new beginnings built on honest foundations." "To second chances," Vivian added. "To finding family in unexpected places," Mrs. Rodriguez said, looking at Evan and Lily. They all drank, and in the gathering dusk, the garden lights came on, soft solar lamps that made the space feel magical. Lily walked through it, touching plants, examining the layout she'd helped design, her face showing satisfaction and something that looked like peace. Then she stopped, turned to face the group, opened her mouth. "It's perfect," she said. Her voice was small and rusty from months of disuse, but it was there. Clear, real. The first word she'd spoken since her mother died. Evan froze, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid to do anything that might break this moment. "Lily?" he whispered. She looked at him with those serious eyes. "It's perfect, Daddy. The garden, the building, everything we built together. It's perfect." Then she was running to him, and he was catching her, and they were both crying while the others politely pretended not to notice, giving them this moment of private miracle in the middle of their public celebration. "You're talking," Evan said through tears. "Baby, you're talking." "I've been wanting to," Lily said, her words coming faster now, like a dam breaking. But the words felt stuck. Like if I started talking, I'd have to talk about Mom being gone, and I wasn't ready. But today, seeing Miss Vivian's painting of her son, seeing everyone building something beautiful, even though sad things happened, I realized it's okay to talk about being sad. It's okay to say things hurt. It doesn't make Mom more gone. Evan held her tighter. "No, baby, nothing makes her more gone. and nothing you say or don't say changes how much she loved you. Vivian approached cautiously. Lily, the painting you made, the one with Caleb and me in the center, thank you. That helped me more than words can express. You miss him, Lily said simply. Like I miss Mom. But you're building things he would like. That helps, right? Yes, it helps enormously. That's what the garden is for me. Something Mom would like. Something that makes being sad feel less scary, because at least I'm making something pretty from it. Mrs. Rodriguez wiped her eyes. This child. This wise, beautiful child. The gathering in his garden continued as darkness fell completely, but now with Lily's voice added to the mix, asking questions, making observations, telling stories about her paintings. It was like watching a butterfly emerge, Evan thought. She'd been in there all along, just waiting for the right moment to unfold. Later, as they prepared to leave, Vivian pulled Evan aside. I have a proposition, she said. The consulting work is expanding faster than I anticipated. I need someone to help coordinate site visits, community meetings, document the process. Someone who understands the human side of development, not just the business side. She paused. I'd like to offer you a different position. Community liaison. You'd work with me on these projects, help train other developers on how to actually engage with neighborhoods. Better pay, better hours, actual weekends off. What do you think? Evan looked at Lily, who was showing Mrs. Rodriguez her favorite parts of the garden, her voice bright and clear in the night air. I think I'd like that, he said. I think I'd like that very much. Good, because you're partly responsible for all this. You made me see people instead of obstacles. Seems only right that you help others learn to do the same. The weeks following the opening were a whirlwind. The New York Times published a follow-up article. Other major publications picked up the story. Invitations poured in for Vivian to speak at conferences, universities, industry events. The Sustainable Development Coalition grew from 5 interested cities to 20. And slowly, incrementally, the financial picture began to improve. Not because the Riverside project suddenly became profitable in traditional terms, but because the attention it generated brought new opportunities. Impact investors, corporate responsibility initiatives, municipalities interested in partnering on similar projects. The board meeting in December, where Vivian's fate would be decided, approached with cautious optimism rather than certain doom. The numbers still aren't great by our traditional metrics, she told Evan the morning of the meeting. But we have enough new business lined up, enough positive momentum, that I think I can make the case for continuing this direction. You'll be fine, Evan said. You're building something that matters. The board will see that. I hope you're right, because I really don't want to get fired right before Christmas. The meeting lasted 8 hours. When Vivian finally emerged, she was smiling. They voted to fully support the new direction, she said, sounding almost dazed. Not just tolerate it, but actually embrace it. We're restructuring the entire company around sustainable, community-centered development. The traditional investors are out, replaced by impact funds, and they promoted me to CEO with an explicit mandate to transform the industry. Evan pulled her into a hug, something he never would have dared 6 months ago. Congratulations, you deserve this. We deserve this. None of it happens without you forcing me to see what I was doing wrong. I didn't force anything, just offered a different perspective. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person brave enough to tell the truth. Christmas came with snow and celebration. The Riverside Community Center hosted a neighborhood party with Lily's paintings decorated with lights and garland. The garden, dormant now for winter, looked peaceful under a blanket of white. Vivian had transformed one of the mansion's wings into a proper art studio for Lily, stocked with every supply imaginable. But more importantly, she'd become a regular presence in their lives, joining them for dinners, attending Lily's therapy sessions when invited, being present in the small moments that mattered. Is Miss Vivian part of our family now? Lily asked one evening while painting at the kitchen table. Evan thought about it. I think she is. Not in the traditional way, but in the way that counts. She chose us, we chose her, and we're building something together. Like the garden? Exactly like the garden. Something new growing from what seemed like empty ground. On New Year's Eve, the Riverside community held a celebration in the completed garden. Despite the cold, hundreds of people gathered to mark not just a new year, but a new way of being in the world. Vivian gave a short speech, thanking everyone who'd made the project possible. Then she invited Lily to say a few words about the garden design. Lily stood at the microphone, small but certain, and spoke clearly into the winter night. When my mom died, everything felt gray, like all the color went away. But then I started painting again, and I realized color was still there. I just had to be brave enough to see it. She looked at the garden around them. This garden is about that, about finding color even when things are dark, about planting seeds even in winter because you believe spring will come, about building beautiful things even when you're sad, because sadness doesn't mean beauty stops existing. The crowd erupted in applause. Evan watched his daughter take a bow, confident and whole, and felt gratitude so profound it nearly knocked him over. After the celebration, the core group gathered one more time in the community center. Evan, Lily, Vivian, Mrs. Rodriguez, Margaret, and a few others who'd been there from the beginning. "So what's next?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked. "You've changed one neighborhood. Where does the revolution go from here?" Vivian pulled out a map covered in pins. "These are cities that have contacted us about implementing similar projects. 23 so far. Each one represents hundreds of families who might get to stay in their homes instead of being displaced. Thousands of lives potentially improved." "That's a lot of gardens to design," Lily said thoughtfully. "Good thing you're getting pretty good at it," Vivian replied, smiling. "I could teach other kids," Lily suggested. "Show them how to turn their neighborhoods into art, how to make things beautiful even when grown-ups are building ugly stuff." Evan laughed. "I think you just designed your own job description." "Cool. I'll need business cards." They spent the next hour dreaming together about community centers in Atlanta, gardens in Portland, affordable housing cooperatives in Denver, about a world where development served people instead of displacing them, where profit and purpose weren't enemies but partners. Later, driving home through snow-quiet streets, Lily fell asleep in the back seat. Evan glanced at her in the rearview mirror, her face peaceful, her hands still showing traces of paint, the physical evidence of creation and healing. He thought about that morning 16 months ago when he'd stood outside Vivian's mansion in the rain, desperate and nearly broken, taking a job he was overqualified for because he had $47 and a daughter disappearing into silence. He'd thought he was just trying to survive, to keep them afloat until things got better. But survival had become transformation. A job had become purpose. A boss had become family. And the mansion that looked like it had swallowed every driver before him had become the place where they'd all learned to see each other clearly, to witness grief and choose grace, to acknowledge brokenness and build beauty anyway. His phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. "Thank you for taking a chance on the worst job posting in Mystic. Changed my life. Changed everything." He typed back, "Changed ours too. Best worst decision I ever made." At home, he carried Lily to bed, tucking her in beside the mountain painting, Caleb's clumsy, hopeful landscape that she'd claimed as her own. Her room was full of art now, evidence of healing rendered in color and light. "Daddy?" she murmured, half asleep. "Are we going to be okay?" "Yeah, baby, we're going to be better than okay." Because of the garden? Because of everything. The garden, the people we met, the chances we took. Because we chose to keep living even when it was hard. Because we found color again. She smiled and drifted back to sleep, and Evan stood there watching her breathe, marveling at resilience and grace and the unexpected ways the world offered second chances. Outside, snow continued to fall over Mystic, blanketing the old buildings and new construction alike, covering the riverside garden where bulbs slept beneath the soil, waiting for spring, softening the edges of the Gothic mansion where Vivian sat in Caleb's studio, probably painting badly and beautifully, probably thinking about her son and smiling instead of crying. Somewhere in the neighborhood, Mrs. Rodriguez was safe in the apartment Vivian's phone call had saved, probably making tamales for tomorrow's dinner and thanking whatever forces had brought this strange family together. And in a dozen other cities, developers were reading about Riverside, wondering if they too could choose differently, if they too could build something that healed instead of harmed. The story that began with loss and desperation had become a story about hope and transformation, about choosing each other, about building gardens in winter because you believed in spring, About discovering that the worst job in town could become the turning point that saved a daughter, redeemed a tycoon, healed a neighborhood, and proved that caring, expensive, inconvenient, difficult caring was always, always worth it. Evan closed Lily's door softly and walked to his own room. On his dresser sat a photo of Sarah, smiling in eternal summer. He touched it gently. "We're okay," he told her. "We're actually going to be okay. Lily's talking again. We found people who chose us. We built something beautiful from the wreckage. I think you'd be proud of us." The photo didn't answer, of course, but in the quiet of that snowy night, Evan felt something like peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you survived the unsurvivable, that you found light in impossible darkness, that you kept going when going felt impossible, and somehow that kept going transformed into actually living again. He climbed into bed, exhausted and grateful, and fell asleep thinking about gardens waiting for spring, about paintings that told truth in color, about second chances and chosen families and the miracle of simply choosing each other and building a future that finally felt safe.